Hi guys. Hope y'all are having a good week so far. It's only Tuesday, but we're starting off. I'm going to talk to you about the general anatomy of the shoulder and the complex, and how it relates to the injuries that it can achieve, or not achieve. Achieve is a bad word. Possess. We'll say possess. So the bony anatomy. There are three main bones of the shoulder. So the clavicle, which is up at the top, the humerus, which is the long arm bone that inserts into the third one, which is the scapula, which is located in the back of the shoulder. The sternum is also there. That attaches in the middle of your body with the rib cage and the clavicle. So joints, there are four main joints through the shoulder. The sternoclavicular joint, which is the sternum and the clavicle. And then the scapulothoracic joint, which is the sternum and the rib cage. It's located in the back, pictured there. It's actually not a true joint, which is interesting because its really main purpose, it's really important to keep the shoulder aligned, especially during the shoulder movement. So when you're basically moving at all, the scapula rubs against the rib cage, and so that like fake joint, not true joint, kind of keeps it in place and aligned. So when there is an injury present, the anatomy kind of gets wonky there, and the scapula isn't always aligned, so it can protrude, or it can sink in, and it can rub wrong. That can cause injury to the muscles and bruising and all kinds of stuff like that. And so not good. So it's important. The acromioclavicular joint, so the scapula and the clavicle, which is up there at the top, it attaches onto the scapula. The acromion process is on the scapula. It's like this weird little area that like pokes out, basically. And then it attaches to the clavicle, and so that area injury can cause all kinds of range of motion problems, and obviously pain, and then support issues, because the clavicle is no longer being supported right there. It can like sink in, or it can cause it'll protrude, or kind of everything. And then the glenohumeral joint, that is the biggest joint out of these. It's the humerus and the scapula, and it's really important because it keeps the humerus in the area like where it's supposed to be, I guess. And so like the humerus is supposed to sit in the socket of the scapula, and so when there's an injury to that, or specifically a dislocation, it can cause a lot of problems with range of motion, because the arm, or not the arm, the shoulder has the greatest range of motion than any other joint in the body. It can cause a lot of problems. One of those problems being dislocations, and the dislocations can cause a lot of pain. They can tear different areas. The glenohumeral joint sticks together through like ligaments, and so the ligaments can be torn, and then it takes a lot more to get it back to the range of motion that it was in the beginning. So rotator cuff muscles, and the deltoid. And so there's four rotator cuff muscles: the supraspinatus, which is up at the top, infraspinatus, which is in the middle, and then teres minor, which is at the bottom on the posterior side. And then on the anterior side is the subscapularis. And then the deltoid muscle, which is the strongest muscle in the body, actually. And it covers to the top of the shoulder, and kind of down the humerus, and covers that whole, like the GH joint, and covers that whole area. Here's some of the basic shoulder movements. So we have flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and then internal, external rotation. These are all possible because of the muscles and the ligaments and the bony areas being in place. And so, like I said earlier, with tears or dislocations, that can be a lot of problems because the areas just aren't being or they aren't in place anymore. So with the rotator cuff muscles and the movements, the rotator cuff muscles actually help to contract and stabilize the humeral head into its socket. And so because the humeral head is staying in its socket, it's able to be the arm is able to move through all of these basic shoulder movements. So without the muscles being as strong as they are, or being like healthy, I guess you would say, these movements are not always capable, like I said back earlier, to like dislocations, sprains, impingements, things like that. So injuries, like we talked, I've kind of been talking through this the whole time, but sprains and strains, dislocations, fractures, impingement are kind of some of just the basics that we kind of have learned about and talked about. Obviously, there's like sprains of like all the different types, or like different dislocations, like clavicle fractures versus other fractures, and then like impingement. And so with all of these injuries, obviously they all have different signs and symptoms and reasons why when they happen the anatomy is messed up. A lot of them are range of motion, like I said earlier, because this the shoulder has the greatest range of motion in the body. Basically, anything that limits the range of motion limits the anatomy to the shoulder, which can be really frustrating for athletes, or really anybody who works in upper body. So volleyball, basketball, baseball, softball players, because when your range of motion is limited, the functional anatomy is limited, and so your shoulder isn't working the way that it usually does. So when you're overhead throwing, but your range of motion is limited, you can't overhead throw as fast, or even in the right way, or throw a curve versus like a straight ball, different things like that. And then with stability, on the stability side, so static stability is usually due to non-contractile structures, and then dynamic stability is due to contractile structures. So non-contractile would be like the bones, cartilage, ligaments, stuff like that. And then contractile is like muscles and tendons, so things that move with the areas. The shoulder has poor static stability, because the limits and the cartilage and the bones, they don't really do a whole lot. And so it's very reliant on the dynamic stability and the dynamic structure that we have. And so when muscles are injured, or tendons are having issues due to strains and sprains and all of these injuries that I talked about earlier, impingement, the shoulders, and just it can't work the way it does. It can't lift as much. It's weaker. The support is decreased, especially with fractures. A clavicle fracture, it makes it harder to do everyday things, like picking up stuff, carrying things is kind of the same thing. But putting weight on your shoulders, lifting, and like I said earlier, throwing. And so, yeah, that's all I have. So if y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I hope you'll have a great week.